Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle DiMarzo, the Fairfield University Art Museum's Curator of Education and Academic Engagement, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to another one of our live events, where our guest is going to be Dr. Douglas Tallamy from the University of Delaware. If you have not yet had an opportunity to explore the virtual worlds of our exhibition, Birds of the Northeast, Gulls to Great Auks, you can go to fairfield.edu/museum/birds of the Northeast and take a virtual tour, watch some of the other very interesting talks that we have had. And if you've attended any of these and know anything about our bird exhibition, you probably know that the show was co-curated by our museum director and 3 members of the Fairfield University Biology Department. We are humble museum professionals and art historians. We are not ornithologists or bird experts. So when it came time to think about who we might bring to campus in a virtual sense, we turned to our biology colleagues, one of whom mentioned you must invite Doug Tallamy to give a lecture. I would not have expected as an art historian to invite an entomologist to speak with the museum. Usually we're trying to keep bugs away from the museum objects. But in fact, it turned out that one of his most recent books was perfectly attuned to the subject of our exhibition. So we're delighted to have him here speaking with us this afternoon. Doug Tallamy is the T.A. Baker Professor of Agriculture in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware, where he has authored, wait for this, 104 research publications and has taught insect-related courses for 40 years. So we'll let that wealth of experience sink in. Chief among his research goals is to better understand the many ways insects interact with plants and how such interactions determine the diversity of animal communities. His book, Bringing Nature Home, was published by Timber Press in 2007 and was awarded the 2008 Silver Medal by the Garden Writers Association. The Living Landscape, co-authored with Rick Dark, was published in 2014. Nature's Best Hope, which is inspiring his talk today, a New York Times bestseller, came out in February of 2020. And his latest book, The Nature of Oaks, was just released by Timber Press in March 2021. Among his awards are the Garden Club of America Margaret Douglas Medal for Conservation and the Tom Dodd Jr. Award of Excellence, the 2018 AHS B.Y. Morrison Communication Award, and the 2019 Cynthia Westcott Scientific Writing Award. With that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Doug Tallamy.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Don't worry about all that experience. I've forgotten most of it at this point. Today, I want to talk to you about what my idea of nature's best hope is. But before I do that, I want to revisit, am I on? There we go. I want to revisit what happened on the East Coast, not this fall, but a year ago fall. We had what I call an oak mast. That's when all the members of a particular oak group, in this case, it was the red oak group, get together and decide to make their acorns at the same time. And this is what it looked like in a lot of places. Well, I'm easily entertained, so I took one of those acorns and I stared at it, and I was rewarded. An insect started to chew its way out of the acorn. First, it chewed a little hole for its head, forced its head through there, and then it forced the rest of its body through there. Very tight squeeze, looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Finally plopped down. Very dangerous time for this insect larva because it is good to eat. There are a lot of things that are after it. So it gets to safety by wiggling and squirming below the surface of the soil. It takes about 30 seconds. Down it goes, where it stretches in all different directions and forms a little chamber. And within that chamber, it converts itself to a pupa. And then it stays there for 2 years. After 2 years, it comes out as an acorn weevil. This is what an acorn weevil looks like. A lot of people think weevils have big noses. I do have a cursor somewhere, but it's not showing up. That is not a nose. That's an extension of the head capsule, and the mouth parts are at the end of that extension. They take those mouth parts and chew a hole down into the center of the acorn. And that is how then they turn around and lay an egg in that hole, and that's how the larva gets into the center of the acorn. Well, you might wonder why they spend 2 years underground. Why don't they come out the very next year? It takes red oak acorns 18 months to complete their development. So if they came out the very next year, there wouldn't be enough acorns. That, of course, leaves a hole in the acorn, a true vacuum, and you know that nature abhors a vacuum. And in this case, she has filled it with 3 species of Temnothorax ants, tiny little ants that live, their entire colony lives within the holes made by acorn weevils in acorns. And if they find a brand new acorn, they are excited because their old acorn is falling apart. So first they tell everybody time to move, then they grab the larvae, they grab the eggs, they work very hard and move the entire colony into the new acorn in about 30 minutes. Then they post a guard at the entrance of the hole and make sure nobody else comes in, no uninvited guests. And they will live there for the next 2 years until this acorn falls apart. About this time, my wife says, "What's your point? What are you trying to tell us?" I'm trying to tell you that that is just one of literally millions of very specialized interactions that comprise most of nature. This is another one, the relationship between jays and oaks. Jays are the primary disperser of oak acorns. They will take an oak or an acorn, they will fly up to a mile away from the parent tree, and then they tap it below the surface of the soil. The idea, of course, is they're going to go get that acorn in the wintertime, have something to eat. But a single jay can bury up to 4,500 acorns in the fall, and they don't remember where a lot of them are. So on average, they end up planting about 3,000 new oak trees per jay every fall. Found out this fall what is pollinating witch hazel. You might remember that witch hazel is it's a small tree that blooms in the fall after frost, after the leaves are down, very late. And then the book says, well, it's small flies that are pollinating witch hazel, but I have never seen anything on witch hazel blooms. But if you go out at night, there's a group of moths called the winter moths that do pollinate witch hazel. This is the bicolored sallow, one of those winter moths. I caught a bicolored sallow on Christmas Eve, so they really do fly late. And I don't know whether witch hazel is blooming late to take advantage of winter moths or whether winter moths are flying late to take advantage of witch hazel. But at this point, they're both taking advantage of each other. Another specialized relationship, you won't have breeding pileated woodpeckers anywhere near you unless you have lots of carpenter ants, because that is what they feed their young. And you won't have carpenter ants unless you have the big trees that make those carpenter ants. You won't have this bee, Andrena facilii, unless you have Phacelia. That is the only pollen that particular bee species can rear its young on. And it turns out that pollen specialization is very common in our native bees. We have about 4,000 species of native bees, and over a third of them can only reproduce on the pollen of particular plants. So for example, in the Northeast, there are at least 13 species of bees that can only reproduce in the pollen of perennial sunflowers. You won't have Baltimore checker spots unless you have white turtlehead. I could talk all day about nature's specialized relationships. The problem is that today these relationships, nature itself is on the ropes. And it's on the ropes because we didn't take Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Way back in 1908, Teddy heard that the state of Arizona was going to mine the Grand Canyon. So he went to the canyon, looked out over the edge, and he said, "Leave it as it is." And with those 5 words, he started the process of creating the Grand Canyon National Park. The problem is that leaving the country as it was is not an option anymore because we didn't. There's only about 5% of the lower 48 states that's anything close to its original pristine ecological condition. And that's because we have logged the country repeatedly. We have tilled it. We have drained it. We've grazed it. We've got 770 million acres of rangeland in this country, which is 4.5 times the size of Texas. And of course, we paved it or otherwise developed it. We have straightened our rivers and dammed them, and you can spell that any way you want. We have polluted our skies and changed our climate for centuries to come. We've drained our aquifers. We've introduced more than 3,300 species of plants from other continents, many of which are now running amok in our natural areas. In short, we've carved up the natural world into tiny remnants of its former self, and each one of those remnants is too small and too isolated to sustain the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. Why have we done that? Well, I guess we thought the Earth, our nest, was so big we could foul it forever and there wouldn't be any consequences. But of course, we were wrong about that. And that's why we're seeing pretty frightening headlines at a regular clip now. Like this one, the insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Talking about global insect decline. Followed by this one, North America's lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. That's a third of our North American bird population gone. And now the UN says that we probably will lose 1 million species to extinction within the next 20 years. And I love the way they report this. They might as well say that we're going to lose oxygen in the next 20 years, then go on to the very next headline as if it doesn't matter. This is not an option, folks. Losing oxygen is not an option, and either is losing 1 million species. We have to make sure that doesn't happen. Well, I could go on talking about the pox that we humans have delivered upon the environment, thus upon all of our houses, but that's not what this talk is about. This talk is about a cure for that pox. It's a cure that will take small efforts from lots of people, but those efforts will deliver enormous physical, psychological, and environmental benefits to everybody. Let's return to this headline. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, the great A.O. Wilson, Harvard emeritus at this point, the most famous entomologist of all times for sure, told us what it would mean if we lost insects. And he did it way back in 1987 with this paper, The Little Things That Run the World. And his message was very clear. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, that would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial habitats that the food webs that support our animals, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, and the mammals, would collapse. And all of those animals would disappear. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients, and all we would have is bacteria and fungi. And of course, humans wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. The good news is, though, that that doesn't have to happen. We can save our insects, we can save our birds, we can save nature itself, but we're going to have to change the way we landscape in order to do it. Why is that? Well, let me just remind you, humans are products of nature. We are totally dependent on productive natural ecosystems because of what those ecosystems give us. They deliver what we call ecosystem services. Here are just a few things that plants provide for us, but also for all the other living things on the planet. They produce that oxygen we all need. They clean our water, slow its journey to the sea where it becomes too salty to use. Carbon capture. Plants are pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, locking the carbon from that molecule up in their tissues, and then pumping the extra carbon into the ground through their roots. Our soils are brown or black because of the carbon that plant roots have put in the ground over the eons. Our soil scientists now tell us that the Earth's soils can sequester 7 times the amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere right now. All we have to do is get it into the ground, and that's exactly what plants do. Plants are building topsoil, they're holding it in place, they prevent floods, they dampen severe weather, lots of really important things. What do animals do for plants? Well, they provide pest control services, they pollinate nearly 90% of our flowering plants, they disperse plant seeds, and many other things. So developing landscapes like this, or designing landscapes like this that destroy the production of ecosystem services is just a bad idea. It never was a good idea, but today it's a terrible idea because we've got 7.8, 7.9 billion people on the planet. We need more ecosystem services today than ever before. So excluding huge parts of the earth for status symbols like lawn is just a bad idea. Now, there have been visionaries through the ages who have recognized that we humans needed to work on our relationship with planet Earth. And Aldo Leopold was one of the most eloquent. He wrote extensively in the first half of the 1900s. One of the things he said is, the oldest task in human history is to live in a piece of land without spoiling it. Now, there have been some indigenous groups that have been good at doing that, but by and large, our huge Western societies and our huge Asian societies have been terrible at doing that. We habitually take more from the earth than it has to offer, completely spoiling a place and then moving on, spoiling another one. And Aldo said that's not a sustainable relationship. So he had this dream that we actually could develop what he called a land ethic. He knew we had to use the earth. We had to farm it and lumber and graze and mine and do all those things. But he dreamt that we could actually learn to do them gently enough that we did not destroy local ecosystems. That's what he called his land ethic. And he wrote about it in the Sand County Almanac. What he didn't write about was developing a land ethic where we actually lived. And I'm not sure why that was, but I suspect the notion that humans and nature cannot coexist in the same place at the same time was so deeply embedded in the culture of Aldo Leopold's day. It's still embedded in our own culture, that he may not have recognized it as an option. What I want to argue this afternoon, though, is that living with nature not only is an option, it's now the only viable option that's left to us. You know, in the past, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We need to turn that on its head now. We need to save nature, actually reconstruct it where there are a lot of people, because that's almost everywhere. In other words, we have to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes, not hang on by a thread, but thrive. Where are we going to do that? Well, let's go back to private property. We can't ignore conservation on private property because most of the land is privately owned. 85.6% of the US east of the Mississippi is privately owned. If we don't do conservation on private property, we're going to fail. because we'll be working on areas that are too small and too isolated from each other. Again, to sustain the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. There are lots of areas, though, that could be used for conservation that right now are not being effectively used for conservation. How about power and pipeline rights of ways? 21 million acres in those types of landscapes. Railroad rights of ways, 3 million acres. Roadsides, 17 million acres. Golf courses, 2 million. Airports, 3 million acres. You know, the Denver airport is twice the size of Manhattan. These are big areas. Then we have all the places we live, both in rural areas and suburbia, our cities, hundreds of millions of acres there. If you add up just those, and you can think of other places, that's 599 million acres that could be used for conservation that right now is not being effectively used. How big is this 599 million acres? It's big. It's bigger than Vermont, plus New Jersey, plus Maine, Virginia, New York, Georgia, Florida, plus Oklahoma, Montana, California, even Texas in there. So not having a place to do conservation is not the issue. There's plenty of places we can do conservation. Now, when I talk about conservation, I'm really talking about reconstructing those specialized relationships that are nature, that comprise our ecosystems. Will they be exactly what was in a place before we humans came along? Probably not, but that's okay. We can still have functioning ecosystems if we put the right species back. It's important to recognize, though, that not all species contribute to ecosystem function equally. So we want to start with the building blocks, the ones that other species depend on. And there's two groups we can't do without. One is those flowering plants. They're capturing energy from the sun, turning it into food, which is then stored in their leaves. But you won't have the flowering plants unless you have the pollinators that allow them to reproduce. So we need plants and their pollinators, but now we have to get the energy from the sun that's in the leaves of the plants to the animals that need it. Most vertebrates don't eat plants directly. They eat something that ate plants, and that something typically is insects. And it turns out that caterpillars are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater, any other type of insect or other plant eaters. So if we design landscapes that don't have a lot of caterpillars in it, most of the energy will remain locked up in the plant leaves, and we will have failed food webs. That's called loss of biodiversity and ecosystem collapse. Let's use the Carolina chickadee as an example. That's the chickadee that we have down here in southern Pennsylvania. You've got the black-capped chickadee. They're all doing the same thing. They're the birds that are feeders right now, eating seeds. And in the wintertime, 50% of their diet is seeds. The other 50% is insects. But when they comes time to reproduce, their babies can't eat seeds. So they switch entirely to insects. And if they're in a healthy environment, they will rear their young exclusively on caterpillars. And they are not exceptions. 96% of our terrestrial birds rear their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. How do I know that? Well, there's a number of lines of evidence that suggest that, but this is a citizen science project that one of my recent students did, Ashley Kennedy. She put out a call to bird photographers all over the country to take pictures of birds as they were bringing food to the nest. Send those pictures to Ashley, and she was going to identify the prey items that were in the beaks of the birds and then reconstruct the nestling diet of as many birds in the country as she could based on those pictures. And the green bars you're seeing here are the percentage of the nestling diets of 20 common bird families that she had enough data for that were caterpillars. And in 16 out of the 20 common bird families, caterpillars dominated the diet. So again, if we don't have enough caterpillars in our landscapes, most of the birds that are out there are not going to be able to successfully reproduce. Something is special about caterpillars. What is it? There's actually several things that are special about caterpillars. One is they're soft prey items. So think of this guy as if he is a little sausage with a very thin wrapper. The thin wrapper is exoskeleton, it's cuticle, made of chitin, undigestible. The birds don't want a lot of it. And because it's soft, you can stuff it down the throat of your offspring without fear of injuring it. If you've ever watched a parent bird rear their young, they're pretty rough. They just take that beak and stuff it down there like a plunger. Caterpillars are also relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. Now, some of our smaller birds do chase aphids around, but do you want to chase 200 aphids or get one caterpillar? They're nutritious, very high in fat, very high in protein, very low percentage of chitin compared to many other insects, particularly beetles. Beetles are not like little sausages, they're like little tanks. So much of a beetle is undigestible, and a lot of beetles have very sharp edges. And finally, it turns out that caterpillars are the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. I mention carotenoids not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate. and you're a vertebrate. Birds are vertebrates, and we vertebrates cannot make our own carotenoids. Only plants make carotenoids. We have to get them from plants, but we have to get them from plants because carotenoids are essential parts of vertebrate diets. And that's why my wife, Cindy, says that I have to eat a lot of carrots to get my beta carotene, and I have to eat a lot of tomatoes to get my lycopene, and whatever that is in the upper left to get my lutein. And when I do eat those things, it stimulates my immune system. I can't think of a better time to have a healthy immune system. Carotenoids are antioxidants. They run around our body, protect our DNA from oxidative damage. They improve color vision. When your mother said, eat your carrots, you will see better, she was right. She didn't know she was right, but turns out she was right. Carotenoids improve sperm vitality. They improve sexual attractiveness. Now we're talking about things like this male prothonotary warbler, who is bright yellow because he's had access to lots of luteins. He takes those luteins, he makes pigments out of them, puts them in his feathers, and the brighter yellow he is, the more ladies he attracts. Oh, there's my pointer. Great. Well, where are they getting their carotenoids from? They're getting them from the prey items that they eat. But carotenoids are not equally distributed across prey items. These first two bars here are types of caterpillars, and they have far more carotenoids than other prey items. The third bar is orthopterids, things like grasshoppers and crickets and katydids. The adult caterpillars, the moths and butterflies themselves, have far fewer carotenoids because they're not eating green leaves. It's only the caterpillars that eat green leaves. And way over here is the earthworm. So the early bird gets the worm, but he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. So it's really starting to look like caterpillars are not optional parts of bird diets. It's seeming like they are essential parts of bird diets. So let's accept that and say birds need caterpillars. The next question is, how many do they need? Is one or two enough, or one or two a day enough? Well, let's go back to chickadees. We've got a lot of data on chickadees. How many caterpillars does it take to make a clutch of chickadees? One or two is not enough. It takes thousands, 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to get one clutch of chickadees to the point where they can fledge, leave the nest. And after they leave the nest, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars for another 21 days, but they're flying all around so nobody can count them. So you were talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars to create a bird that's a third of an ounce. That's 4 pennies worth of bird. And if you want chickadees breeding in your yard, and we do, because in so many places, that's all that's left, you have to have all those caterpillars in your yard, because chickadees forage from the nest about 50 meters. They're not flying 5 miles down the road to the nearest woodlot. And if you don't have all those caterpillars in your yard, that's called insect decline. And it's really looking like insect decline is one of the major factors causing bird declines. We went to the original data set from Rosenberg et al. That's the group that said that we have lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. And we divided the terrestrial birds that they looked at into two groups. The birds that require insects at some part of their life history, and the birds that do not require insects. So things like doves and finches can reproduce off seeds. They actually gained a few numbers in the last 50 years, but the birds that require insects lost on average 10 million individuals per species. It doesn't prove cause and effect, but it certainly is suggestive that as insects go, so go the birds that need them. Pretty logical. So I assume we want birds around, but there's a lot of other things that depend on those insects as well. We have to start creating landscapes that support insects, particularly caterpillars. How do we do that? We add caterpillars to landscapes by adding the plants that makes them. That seems easy enough, but there is a catch, and that is that most plants don't make a lot of caterpillars. So we have to be very choosy. We have to be fussy about which plants we choose for our landscapes. And we have to be fussy because the caterpillars themselves are fussy. Monarch butterfly is a perfect example. You can have all the Callery pear and all the boxwood and all the burning bush and all the barberry and all those Asian ornamentals that we love to landscape with, and you won't make a single monarch butterfly in your yard. The only way you're going to make a monarch butterfly is to have milkweed. That is the plant that they develop on. That's called host plant specialization. And it turns out that the vast majority of insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. Why is that? Because plants have made them that way. Plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they've loaded their leaves with nasty tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds that make those leaves either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a very effective defense that keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world. If you don't believe me, go outside and eat a plant. See if you like it. Wait till the plant grows, then eat it. You're not going to like it. That's the reason it's green in the summertime. It's not because there are no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of their plants. They're too well protected chemically. There's a reason it is hard to get our kids to eat their vegetables. They inherently know that they're toxic. That's my little joke. This is not a joke, though. Insects do eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those chemical defenses? This is where the specialization comes in. Every plant lineage that's out there protects itself with a unique cocktail of chemical defenses. And any given insect species cannot adapt to all of them. So they pick one or two that are very similar in their chemical defenses, and they get good at getting around those. They have specialized enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those compounds, behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that minimize their exposure to those compounds. But it takes a long period of evolutionary exposure to those particular plant lineages for all those adaptations to fall into place. It doesn't happen overnight. And once they do fall into place, the insect is locked into eating that particular group of plants because they haven't specialized on any of the others. And that is why when we bring in plants from other continents, our insects can't eat them. They haven't been here. Those plants haven't been here nearly long enough for insects to adapt it. And that takes who knows how long. Tens of thousands of years for host switches to actually happen. So all I'm saying here is that plant choice matters. If we're trying to reconstruct food webs in a place where we've already broken them down, you have to pick the right plants or it's not going to work. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of how well that does work when we do pick the right plants. And I'm going to start with our house right here in Oxford, Pennsylvania. My wife Cindy and I live on an old farm that was broken up into 10-acre lots. Last thing that happened before they sold the farm was they mowed it for hay. So there were almost no plants here. So that was our goal, was to put plants back and rebuild the biodiversity that was once on this land. It had been farmed for just about 300 years, long time without a lot of biodiversity. So in order to put the biodiversity back, you have to put the plants back that support the caterpillars, that support the food webs that the birds and everything else eats. And that was my goal. I started with the Canadian owlet. I'd never seen a Canadian owlet. That's what a Canadian owlet looks like. That's what the adult looks like, just like a leaf. But you're not going to have Canadian owlets unless you have meadow rue. That's the only thing they eat. Well, there used to be meadow rue in this area hundreds of years ago, but it's long, long gone. So I got some meadow rue seeds from someplace and planted them, grew very nicely. But I was just starting out, and I was pretty skeptical that any Canadian owlets would actually find my little patch of meadow rue. So I didn't even go out and check it for about a month and a half. And finally I walked by for some other reason, and it was almost defoliated with Canadian owlets. They had found it right away. So big success. Now we have a good population of meadow rue and Canadian owlets. Excuse me. So we've added 2 species to the property. Same story with this beautiful moth, the goldenrod stowaway. That's a misnomer, it has nothing to do with goldenrod. It's actually a specialist on this plant, Bidens aristosa. I did know where there were some Bidens in a power line cut about 14 miles away. So I went and got some seeds, planted them at home. They grew very nicely. Took about a year for the goldenrod stowaway to find my Bidens, but it did. And now we have a good population of both the plant and the insect. So now we've added 4 species to the property. Same story with the hackberry emperor. That's a butterfly that should be here. I want it just because it should be here, not because it's the most beautiful butterfly in the world. But as its name suggests, it's a specialist on hackberry, and we didn't have any hackberry. So I planted hackberry. We had to wait 4 years for the butterflies to find our hackberry, but they finally did. And I walked by one of my hackberry trees this past June. There were 9 hackberry emperor caterpillars on a single branch. So another big success. And now we've added 6 species, and that's how it's gone. I did not plant goldenrod. They came in on its own, and along with it came many of the things that eat goldenrod, like the beautiful brown-hooded owlet, the Arcigera flower moth, the goldenrod leaf miner, the distinct Sparaginothus, the goldenrod gall moth. This is one that hasn't come, the goldenrod flower moth. I don't know why it hasn't found our goldenrod, but it hasn't. That's what the caterpillars look like. So this is part of the game. It's anticipation. It's like waiting for the ketchup to come out of the bottle. Every year I go out and I look at my goldenrod, hoping I will find this caterpillar. One of these years I will, and that'll be a great day. Planted Virginia creeper. Yes, Virginia creeper. For some reason, people don't like it. I don't know why. It's got good fall color. It's a great native plant. It can climb our trees without pulling them down without girdling them. Makes a great ground cover, makes wonderful berries for the birds in the fall. Believe it or not, it's a great plant for pollinators. It has little greenish yellow flowers. They don't look much like flowers, but the bees sure love them. And it's one of the best hosts for our big sphinx moths that are a primary component of cardinal diets. So things like the Pandora sphinx and its beautiful adult, the Leonard sphinx, the hog sphinx, the Abbott sphinx, all on Virginia creeper. Wanted to see if I get the double-toothed prominent, just because it's such a cool looking caterpillar. It's a specialist on elm. So I got some elm seeds from the gutter at the University of Delaware and I planted them, grew very, very nicely. Caterpillar came right away. One of the evening primrose moth, because it's beautiful. I like beauty like anybody else. Well, you need evening primrose for the evening primrose moth. I planted that and the moths finally came. The adults spend the day with their head stuffed in the flowers. It's very cute. And we planted lots of oaks. Now, these are just examples of plants we put on our property. But I want to focus on oaks for a while because they're such important plants. This is the Bedford oak in Bedford, New York. Some of you probably have seen it. It's enormous. People argue about whether it's 400 years old or 500 years old. But I hear people say, you know, I don't want to plant an oak because I won't live long enough to enjoy it. Well, if it has to be 400 years old for you to enjoy it, you're right, you won't. But if you can enjoy what oaks do on your property, you can enjoy them immediately. And I can say that with confidence because I planted my oaks as acorns, free, or 2-foot bare root whips, which cost $1.50 each. And right away, they started to bring the moths to my yard that support the food web at my yard. Things like the solitary oak leaf miner, Juvenil's dusky wing, yellow-shouldered moth, the orange-headed epicalema, the red-washed caterpillar, the yellow-vested moth, the orange-tufted oneida, the spiny oak caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oakworm, the orange-humped oakworm, the pink-striped oakworm, the delightful dagger moth, the pleasant dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the crowned bucolatrix, the white blotch heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red-lined panapoda, the laugher, and literally hundreds more species have come to the oaks on my property, and they come right away. This is a pin oak that has just popped its head above the leaves here, and here's a caterpillar standing on the ground eating the leaves of that pin oak. So they contribute immediately. You don't have to wait centuries for that to happen. This is what our house will look like in a month or two when the leaves come out. I am sitting in that window right now. I show you this just to prove we're very traditional. We got a lawn here, but I put a lot of plants back. And I noticed a long time ago, when I put the plants back, those moss species that create the biodiversity at my yard come right away. So 4 years ago, I made it a goal to start taking pictures of every species of moth I could find on my property just to see how successful we've been. I'm still doing it because I keep getting new ones, and I'm up to 1,034 species of moths, which is more species than all of the birds in North America. We have 10 acres. Pennsylvania is 2.4 million acres. So in 1/240,000th of the landmass of Pennsylvania, we have 40% of all the moss species that occur in Pennsylvania. And because many of these are types of bird food, we have recorded 59 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres. You know, we saw another frightening headline this fall. The World Wildlife Fund says that 2/3 of Earth's wildlife have vanished since 1970. Pretty scary, but I'm thinking, not at our house. I guarantee we have increased biodiversity by more than 2/3 at our house, and it didn't take nearly that long, and we did it simply by putting the right plants back. So I'm telling you this so that you don't despair. We can turn these terrible headlines around, but we all have to get active. We all have to plant those plants that support the life around us. But I know what you're thinking. Well, we've got 10 acres and maybe you don't. So will it work on a smaller property, perhaps in suburbia? And that is a good question. So let's go to Margie and Dan Terpstra's house in Kirkwood, Missouri, where the major invasive plant is Amur honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle. Well, they bought a property, 0.6 acres, so 18 times less land than Cindy and I have. And the first thing they did was get rid of their bush honeysuckle, but then they planted a lot of native plants. And they put in a water feature they call a bubbler. And then they sat back and started to count the birds that are using their yard. They're up to 149 bird species that have used their yard, including 35 warbler species. Just to put that in perspective, we've only recorded 8 warbler species at our house. So does it work on smaller properties? In the middle of suburbia, they are surrounded by the typical suburban houses with big lawns. Yes, it does work. Let's go into urban yards. Will it work in a more urban setting? Well, at Pam Carlson's house in Chicago, and I do mean in Chicago because right on the other side of this wall here is one of the O'Hare Airport's runways. Right over here is Kennedy Expressway. And Pam only has 1/10 of an acre. That is 3 times smaller than the average lot size in North America. But she did the same thing. She got rid of her invasive plants. She put in 60 species of native plants, and she did it in a really pretty way. Put in a water feature for those birds, and then she sat back and started to count the birds that have used her yard. And let me remind you, she's on 1/10 of an acre in the middle of Chicago with no connectivity at all to any type of natural area. So she's a little island, but she has recorded, that's an old figure, 118 species of birds that have used her yard, including a woodcock. If you haven't seen, that's Pam's woodcock right there. She sent me that picture. If you haven't seen a woodcock lately, go to Pam's house. That's where it is. What about city centers though? 82% of us are said to live in cities these days. Well, in 2014, I was staring at this plant, Asclepias tuberosa, butterfly weed, which reminds me, we've got a real marketing issue with our native plants. We call them weeds and wonder why people don't plant them. So let's not call this butterfly weed anymore. Let's call it Monarch's Delight. Okay, 2014, I'm staring at Monarch's Delight, and the first thing I saw were 2 species of leafcutter bee, megachilid bees. I know they're megachilid bees, leafcutter bees, because they carry the pollen on their tummy, not on their legs. Well, leafcutter bees have very specific requirements. Not only do they need pollen and nectar, but they need soft leaves. Leaves, for example, the ones that are produced by redbud are perfect because they're very soft. And the bees cut out the edges of those leaves and leave these little semicircles. They roll up the semicircle, stuff it full of pollen, lay an egg on it, and that's how they reproduce. Then they put that whole package into a crack or a crevice. Well, there was a redbud tree growing right next to Monarch's Delight, and I'm pretty sure that's why there were leafcutter bees there. I'm also pretty sure that's why there were bumblebees there. Remember, bumblebees overwinter as queens. All their workers die in the fall, so they overwinter as queens. And when they come out in the spring, they have to start the colony all by themselves. Excuse me. So they don't have any helpers, so they need a lot of very efficient foraging. And that's exactly what redbud provides. Lots of blooms in a single place, enough to get that colony started. Well, then I saw a monarch. Actually, I saw 2 monarchs that were foraging on Monarch's Delight. Now, this was, remember, 2014. I had gone all of 2013 without seeing a single monarch. That was the low point in the monarch's population. Only 3.6% of the monarchs left compared to 1976. And this was June. It's very early to see monarchs this far north. So I was really encouraged that maybe the monarch wasn't going to disappear after all. Why were they there? Well, they had Monarch's Delight, but they also had another species of milkweed. I think it's purple milkweed, which was not only was it in bloom, so the monarchs had some nectar, but that's their host plant. They could lay their eggs on it. Do you know where I was? I was on the High Line in the middle of New York City. There's the Monarch's Delight. And this is the amount of nature I'm talking about here. Many of you have probably been to the High Line. It's a renovated, it was an elevated railroad that they turned into a tourist destination. It's been very successful. Everybody wants a little bit of nature in Manhattan. It's 30 feet above the taxis and the cement, right in the middle of all the construction. Millions, literally millions of people go to the High Line every year, but it doesn't matter to the monarchs and the leafcutter bees, to a number of birds. Somebody's done a survey of the bees using the High Line. It's up to 30 species at this point. Now, this guy here is Rick Dark, and he had always been after me to go see the beautiful plants on the High Line. I'm not much of a city boy, so I always drag my feet. And besides, seeing beautiful plants with nothing using them is actually, that's depressing to me. And that's what I thought I would see if I went to the High Line in Manhattan. But he finally got me there, and I was totally wrong. I saw all the things I just described to you in 20 minutes, and I'm sure there was a lot more there. So I'm a convert. If thoughtful native plantings can bring life back to the middle of Manhattan, I am convinced we can do this anywhere. But there are 4 things we need to think about if we're going to be successful. And one of them is we've got to shrink the area that's in lawn. Lawn, first of all, is not a functioning ecosystem. It's a deadscape, and we've got 40 million acres of it, which is bigger than the area of New England. Why do we have lawn? Well, you know, it's a status symbol. We're not going to get rid of our status symbols, but we can have less area. We can reduce the size of our status symbol. I'm suggesting we cut it in half. The area that we keep in lawn will still manicure. We will still be good citizens. Our neighbors will still like us, but we're going to put plants back. And if we do that in half the area that is now in lawn, that gives us 20 million acres to work with. And if we do it at home, we can create a new national park that I'm calling Homegrown National Park. And it'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, plus Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, plus Sequoia National Park, the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. Add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. And so we're going to have the biggest national park in the country. What do we get when we put a park at home? You get a number of things. You get the opportunity to develop a personal relationship with the natural world, and you can do it at your own time and your own pace. All you have to do is go outside. You can avoid crowds. You know, if you go to a real national park, there are millions of other people there. It's free. There's no admission charge, no travel hassles. It's never closed, no matter what pandemic comes down the road. But here's the big one. You get to experience the natural world alone. That is tough to do at a real national park. And I don't know how you can develop that personal relationship with the natural world unless you are alone. And this is particularly important for our kids. And Richard Lewis says they're suffering from nature deficit disorder because they don't know anything about the natural world, which is terrible because they are the future stewards of our planet. If they don't know what they're supposed to be stewarding, they're going to be lousy stewards. So what do? We get 30 kids and put them on a bus with a teacher, and they drive for an hour. And then they walk around for an hour. The teacher tells them not to touch anything. Then they get back in the bus and they go home. And that's their experience with the natural world, which I'm sure is better than nothing, but not much, not much. It's really an experience with 30 other kids and a teacher telling them not to touch anything. Let them go out in their own yard alone and discover nature when they're ready. Again, alone, no parental supervision. Let them risk it. And maybe they will learn how to hunt lizards. I'm learning this from my own granddaughter. This is Zoe, who lives in Hawaii on a very modest piece of nature. It's a piece of grass with a hedge. But there are anole lizards there, and she discovered that and sent me this picture to describe very carefully how you hunt lizards. You get on the ground and you disguise yourself with leaves and sticks so the lizards don't see you coming. Then you crawl very slowly toward the lizard. No smiling. This is serious business. You can wear your best dress, that's okay, but you sneak up on the lizard, you catch the lizard, you put it in an aquarium, and you've got that personal relationship with a part of the natural world. Now, I don't think Zoe's going to be crawling on the ground in her best dress catching lizards the rest of her life. I don't think. But I guarantee she will remember doing this, and I also guarantee that that will help her be a good steward of the planet when she grows up. If you want to do more than hunt lizards, or get your kids to do more anyway, buy this book, Nancy Stranisti's Nature Play at Home. Gives you dozens of ways you can get your kids out into nature right where they live. And if you want to join Homegrown National Park, go to our new website, homegrownnationalpark.org, and get yourself on the map. Let's see, we're way over here. The object is to record the area of your county that you are planting with native plants, the area of lawn that you're reducing. If you already have some natives, that's okay, count it and put down the location. And then we're going to see your little section of your county light up. And the goal is to get all 20 million acres lit up here for people that have joined Homegrown National Park. But you know, as I say that, there's no reason to stop at 20 million acres. Let's do the whole country. We got over 5,000 people on the map right now, and we're at 1% of our 20 million acres. So we have a little bit of ways to go here, but you can help us. All right, we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to put in, what are we going to put in the area that we take out of lawn? Some of the plants we put in there have to be what I call keystone plants. Now remember the Roman arch? The keystone is the stone in the middle of that arch. If you take the stone out, the arch collapses. Well, that's how valuable keystone plants are in our food webs. If you take keystone plants out of the food web collapses. Why? Because keystone plants are making most of the food. Just 5% of our native plants are making 75% of the caterpillar food that drives our food webs. 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives our food webs. So if you're building an ecological house in your yard, the keystone plants are the 2x4s of that house. They are essential. They're holding the house up. You can't build your house out of wallpaper. So they're not sufficient. You need to add other things beside those keystone plants, but you absolutely need these. So the question no longer is simply, are natives better than non-natives? On average, they certainly are, but there are a lot of native plants that are not contributing all that much. So let's focus on, or at least not leave out, the critically ecologically important plants. And we certainly don't want a landscape only with those ecologically destructive plants. The calorie pear, the barberry, the burning bush, the bush honeysuckle that escape our yards and biologically pollute all the land around of us. In such a serious way, they're ecologically castrating it. I get an email once in a while from somebody that says, don't I know that ginkgos, Ginkgo biloba from Asia, actually grew in North America 7 million years ago. That makes them native. That means we can plant them and everything will be great. Yes, I do know that ginkgos grew in North America 7 million years ago. We can argue about whether that makes them native today, but I'm not going to have that argument because that's not our metric anymore. It's not whether the plant is native or not. It's whether it's productive or not. I don't care whether ginkgos grew on the moon 7 million years ago. Right now, they produce 0 species of caterpillars right here. 0 species in Connecticut. There are 2 rare records of caterpillars on there. I've never found them. You're never going to find them. If you want to really find caterpillars, you go to the #1 keystone plant in 84% of the counties of North America. And that is one of the oaks. In the mid-Atlantic states, 557 species of caterpillars supported by oaks. That's 557 species of bird food. Over 900 species of caterpillars nationwide. There is no other plant genus that comes close to that. So here's the role of keystone oaks in my yard. Now remember, I'm taking pictures of the moths. I've gotten 1,034 moth species so far. I haven't gotten to the butterflies yet. I will get to the butterflies. Out of the 1,034 species, 910 have known host plants. So there's still more than 100. I don't know what they're eating. Of the 910, 270 species use oaks. Now I've got 69 genera of native woody plants on our property, and only one of them is genus Quercus, the oaks, and hundreds of genera of herbaceous plants. So oaks represent less than 1.5% of our woody plant diversity and way less than 1% of our total plant diversity, but they support at least 30% of our moss species diversity. That's the role of a keystone plant in a food web. If we took oaks out of our yards, our diversity would crash. How do you find out what the keystone plants are for where you live? You go to Native Plant Finder and the National Wildlife Federation website, and you put in your zip code, and the rank list of both woody and herbaceous plant genera that support the most caterpillars in your county will pop up. So here's a list here. I stopped because I ran out of room, not because this is all of them. But notice I say native oaks, native cherries, native willows, native birches. All the blueberries are native. I say that because if you go to the nursery and say, I want to buy a cherry, I guarantee they're going to sell you a flowering cherry from Asia. I want to buy a willow. They'll sell you a weeping willow from Turkey. I want to buy a birch. It'll be a European birch, or a maple will be a Japanese maple. That's what most nurseries are carrying. You've got to specify that you want a native member of one of these genera. There are non-native genera, but if you plant the non-natives, you're going to reduce caterpillar use by 65%. We have done that experiment. These are the top herbaceous plant genera. Goldenrods are always way up there. The various genera that asters were broken up into, perennial sunflowers. Not only are they the best genera in terms of making caterpillars, 110 caterpillars on goldenrods, by the way. They're also the best genera in terms of supporting those specialized bees. You get over 40 species of bees in Connecticut if you plant those 3 genera in your yard. And if you don't plant them, that's 40 species of native bees that will not be in your yard. So we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to put in keystone plants. We're going to attract a lot of insects to our yard, and then we're going to kill them at our security light, which of course is not the goal. There's a lot of research coming out now, big flurry of papers making a very convincing case that light pollution is one of the major causes of insect decline. The lights are nocturnal lights. I mean, the lights we have on at night will kill insects through exhaustion. Those moths fly around and around and around. Collisions with the light bulb, they get incinerated, they die from dehydration. The bat comes and picks them off. Many nocturnal insects are blinded by bright lights, and it keeps them from doing what they're supposed to be doing. I actually think this is really good news. We cannot allow our insect populations to continue to decline. We've got to find ways to turn it around. And if this is one of the major causes of declines, it's also the easiest one to turn around. Just turn your lights off, flick of a switch. Nothing could be easier. But I know what you're going to say. Oh, I can't turn my garage light off because the bad man will come. All right, put it on a motion sensor. So it only turns on when the bad man does come. And the first thing you're going to find out is the bad man does not come very often. And if you don't want to do that, take the white light out of the white bulb out of your security light. Mercury vapor bulb is the very worst because it's so attractive to insects, and replace it with a yellow bulb. And a yellow LED bulb is the best because they're the least attractive to nocturnal insects. If we replaced our white bulbs with yellow LED bulbs overnight, we would reduce insect mortality by billions of insects. And we'd also save billions of dollars because they're really energy efficient. Okay, we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to put in keystone plants. We're going to turn out our lights, and then we'll invite Mosquito Joe to come and kill all our insects. We have no end to the ways we like to kill our insects. This is a booming business all over the country right now. But it doesn't work, folks. You know, Mosquito Joke says, not Mosquito Joke, maybe it is. Mosquito Joe says that this is a natural product. So it's okay. And it is a natural product. It's pyrethroids made from chrysanthemums. But cyanide is a natural product too. So that's not a good argument. He also says it's only going to kill mosquitoes. That's simply incorrect. It kills all the insects it comes in contact with. But again, the big thing is it doesn't work. You don't kill, you don't try to control mosquitoes in the adult stage. You control them in the larval stage. If you're going to control mosquitoes in the adult stage, you have to kill 90% of the adults. Mosquito Joe kills about 10% of the adults. He's not even close to working. And that's why he has to keep coming back and back and back. He's also very expensive. What you can try that does work and is not expensive is mosquito dunks. You get a bucket, you fill it full of water, put in some straw or hay, and let it ferment for a couple of days. What's happening is diatoms and algae start to grow in your water there. And that's exactly what what ovipositing mosquitoes, the female mosquitoes that want to lay their eggs, are looking for. That's an irresistible brew that attracts them. They lay their eggs there. In just a few days, those eggs hatch. That's when you put in a mosquito dunk that you got at the hardware store. This is a natural bacterium, Bacillus thuringiensis, that kills aquatic Diptera. And the only aquatic Diptera in your bucket here is mosquitoes. So it's a very targeted control. And it only kills mosquitoes in your bucket. So if a dragonfly gets in there, no problem. If your dog licks it or a bird drinks it, not toxic at all. So cheap. If everybody did it, it would be effective. And it doesn't kill any other insects. The fourth thing we need to do is to landscape in a way that allows our caterpillars to complete their development. What do I mean by that? Well, I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where oaks support 511 species of caterpillars. A few of them, like the Polyphemus moth, complete their development on the tree. The caterpillar eats the leaves, then it spins a cocoon and hangs from the branch, then the adult emerges and does it all over again. And I wish they all did that, but most of them don't. 94% of the caterpillars on oaks, 480 species, after they finish growing as caterpillars, they drop from the tree and they wiggle their way beneath the ground and pupate underground, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that is under the tree. And that's the problem. There isn't a leaf litter under a tree. And the ground is mowed and trampled and so compacted the caterpillars can't get under there. So this becomes an ecological trap. We're calling in caterpillars or adult moths to lay their eggs that aren't going to survive. I am convinced that this type of landscaping is a major cause, another major cause of insect declines. But I'm not trying to, of course, the cement landscape is even a worse viable option. It's not a viable option at all. I'm not trying to discourage the use of trees in cities. I'm trying to discourage the profligate use of cement as a default landscape. We know that it destroys our watersheds. We know that cement is a major releaser of carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas. So we can do better. This is what most people do. You have a big tree in a lawn, and nobody's measured the success rate of caterpillar development in a situation like this. I was going to do it last summer, but the COVID said no. But I guarantee that it's going to be much higher success rate in a situation like this. We have a layered landscape. So here's your tree. You could have a dogwood here and then a native azalea and ferns and ground cover. Caterpillar drops down into a safe site. It can easily get below the ground because it's not compacted. It can spin a cocoon and any leaf litter that's under there, much higher survivorship. This is where you can do your spring ephemeral gardening. It's beautiful, but this is a great way to shrink your lawn. You put big beds around the trees that are there, then you have much less lawn. Safe sites. This is where you can use your ground covers. So things like wild ginger or foam flower or mayapple, ferns. This is a hotel in Athens, Georgia. We have red maples. If there's a caterpillar that drops out of the tree there, it's in a safe site, even though this is the middle of the city. So we can do better. Another graduate student, Desiree Narango, has done some great work in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. She studied chickadees, and the results of her study suggest that there is room for compromise in our plant choice, and that's good news to me. She studied how well landscapes, suburban landscapes that are landscaped primarily with native plants, support chickadee populations compared to landscapes that are dominated by introduced plants. And the first thing she found is that when the landscapes are dominated by introduced plants, they support 75% fewer caterpillars. So right away, the amount of bird food is reduced by 75%. Those landscapes were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees at all. There's a nest box up in each landscape, but chickadees came, they looked around and said, there's not enough food here. We're not even going to try. If they did try to nest there, those nests can contain 1.5 fewer eggs. They were 29% less likely to survive at all. Those nests produced 1.2 fewer fledglings if they did survive, and it took them 1.5 days longer to do that. And if you put all that together in a population growth model as a function of the percentage of non-native woody plant biomass in your yard, from none to 100%, this is what you get. The dotted line is replacement rate. That's the rate at which the population has to make babies in order to replace the adults that die every year. If you reproduce at this rate, that's a sustainable population. It's not growing, but it's not shrinking either. If you make more babies than adults die, you've got a growing population. But if you have fewer babies than adults die, anything down here below the line, you've got an unsustainable shrinking population. Right here, generously speaking, is where those lines overlap, which means you can have up to 30% of your woody plant biomass non-native without destroying your local food bed. Oh no. This is my computer automatically updating, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Well, maybe that would be a good time to jump into, even though we've had to just cut short, you had already given us your final line before you started.
Well, let me kind of wrap up. Boy, my IT guys are going to hear about this. Okay. Is everybody still hearing me? I can still talk?
Yes.
All right. Bottom line is, folks, that we have a global biodiversity crisis that has a grassroots solution. Everybody has a responsibility to stopping the decline of the biodiversity that supports us. You can do it if you own property. That's obvious where you can work. And if you don't own property, you can volunteer and help somebody who does. You can help a land conservancy. You can help a park or a preserve. But there's 4 things that you can do as an individual. Right now, we all feel powerless because the Earth's problems are so huge, but a single person can make a difference here. You can go outside, you can put in one of those keystone plants, you can rejuice your lawn, you can put in a pollinator garden that I didn't get to talk about, you can get rid of your invasive plants. Those are 4 things that everybody can do on every piece of land around us. And that will restore your ecosystem, and you will see it happen right in front of your eyes. It's motivating because it works. So a single person can make a difference that empowers you. And it also shrinks the problem down. Well, it says it's done. Should we try? Nah, let's just keep going. It empowers you, or no, it shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Because, if you think of the entire planet's problems, you get depressed. But just think about the piece of the Earth that you can influence, and you can see that it will work. So it's a manageable challenge. So that is the bottom line. Each one of us really is nature's best hope. This is not going to be solved by the government. It's going to be solved by all of us. Thank you very much, and I apologize for my.
But
now my computer's updated. It's updated. It's great.
Everyone has run into this problem at some point. In fact, we realized that we had a problem in just the event listing for tonight's event. some people are going to be joining in a few minutes, and they're going to be very
Yes.
surprised that the event is over. But
Yes, I was caught up in that, in fact.
he was.
Okay.
This is Dr. Todd Osier, a colleague from our biology department, one of the co-curators of our exhibition. Todd, since you were, yes, caught up in that, I will ask if you have any questions first for Doug.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I came in about halfway through, and I'm lucky to have been a fan for many years. I was introduced to your work through my in-laws, who have been for years part of the Wild Ones in Michigan, and have been, we've gotten a DVD, one year, one of your DVDs on a book over the years. And so we've been sort of, learning about your approach through them for a number of years. And so one of the things that sort of struck me as I was listening, and you're talking about the lights at night, light pollution, getting your children outside, there are so many of these aspects that you're touching on draw towards people's just natural fears. I think here in Connecticut, right, we've got, Lyme disease and ticks, and so, you said Mosquito Joe, and I was just laughing because, right, we have Tick Ranger, and you see all over, and the Tick Ranger is out going to wrestle up all the ticks and take care of them, right? But that's in direct conflict, and I've seen that in our own yard. So just to sort of back up and offer perspective. So we bought our property, 10 years ago, and we've done this de-lawning, rewilding in our own property. And what I found was, I had this neat setup planned where we've got, lawn integrated with it, so we could still use the lawn, but then I had these narrow paths mowed. And the goldenrod and the vegetation swept over the paths, and we were picking up ticks going out to the fire pit, right? And so that's in direct conflict with this idea of, bringing nature into your yard. And so we had to realign what we're doing. And so I said, well, I'm going to get rid of these couple of paths and just put in one larger path, so that way we can walk and not brush against the grass. And it's those sort of things. I mean, and I've had Lyme disease twice, and so that there are a number of these sort of social, medical, aspects that are really fighting right in the face of trying to increase biodiversity in your backyard. I mean, it's fascinating.
There are. And there are challenges, and that's a question I get all the time. And you hit on the solution: make your grass paths wider, because ticks quest. They get up there on vegetation, and they don't run after you and jump on you. They grab on when you walk by. I've had Lyme disease 5 times, so I know what you're talking about.
Oh, it's not a competition, I don't think.
Is not. But it's a serious thing. I am lucky, because when I get a tick, it itches. And if I get Lyme disease, I get the big bullseye. So it doesn't sneak up on me. Somebody told me, it was a guy who is a Lyme disease researcher at the University of Pennsylvania decades ago. He said, pull the tick off, and we're talking about deer ticks. We're talking about black-legged ticks, and put Neosporin right on the spot. He said, because it takes many hours for the Borrelia that the tick has injected to get into your capillaries, and the Neosporin will kill it. It's a zero risk, easy prevention that, as far as I can tell, works really well, because whenever we have done that, and my wife and I get ticks all the time, it works. I did get Lyme disease one time after he told me that, because I had itchy toes, and I thought it was athlete's foot. I didn't even check. Stupid. It was a tick, and then yes, I got Lyme disease. So yes, it's a serious problem, but you know what? It's not serious enough that we get serious about the solution. Trying to kill all the ticks is not going to control it. We've got to get the deer population down that has caused the explosion of the deer ticks and the Lyme disease that we didn't have when we were growing up. When I was growing up in New Jersey, we found a deer footprint in my front yard, and it was such an event. We never saw the deer. I made a plaster cast of it. It was on my shelf That's how low deer populations were.
Mhm.
Now they're 10 times over the carrying capacity. So,
Yeah.
so that's the real solution. And you know, the Bambi effect says we're not going to deal with it. But yes, those things are really slowing me down. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and that does tie in. I mean, this is the perfect, the sort of the perfect segue. Is I was thinking when you're going through the list of deer-resistant plant, or talking about native plants, the list of deer-resistant plants, there's not that much overlap. And so, you know, you run into, hey, plant some barberry because the deer don't eat it. And that's when we bought our house. It was perfectly landscaped with the most deer and insect and edible plants, right? And so it's basically a wasteland, which is, you know, what a lot of people are hoping for. They don't have bug problems, they don't have deer problems, but at the same time, it's an ecological desert. And so,
right. If we make bug-free, deer-free places all over the planet, we're done for.
Yeah.
Because the deer don't like the non-native plants, just like our insects don't. So unfortunately, there are some natives that the deer won't touch. Spicebush is one of them, which is why you often have understories just loaded with spicebush. And yeah, it's a native plant, and the spicebush swallowtail gets on it, but it supports very few caterpillars compared to the things that we need to have in our understory, particularly the young canopy trees. Any oak tree that pops its head above the ground is nailed by the deer right away. And if we do that for a century, we don't have forests anymore. So yeah, there are lots of good reasons to control our deer. And I do recognize it's not the deer's fault. Guess whose fault it is, you know? Or we can put the wolves back. I'm all for that too, but.
Doug, can I jump in with a question from one of our viewers? This is from Janet. She says, the hardest part I've found is trying to get people to stop cleaning up their yard as soon as it gets a little warm and before caterpillar, pupae, and bees can emerge safely. Do you have anything I could say to these people to delay their cleanup efforts?
Yeah, I have a lot you can say. You know, there's this idea this is probably the 10th time this week I've gotten this question. Has it been 50 degrees long enough that all the insects have emerged and I can get rid of all my leaves? This is an urban legend. You know, insects emerge. Yes, some of them start after it's been warm for a while. We call them degree days, and they accumulate. But they emerge all season long, right up into September. So there is no one set of degree days that accumulate, and then all the insects come out, and then you can throw everything that they need away. That beautiful evening primrose moth I'm talking about, they don't come out until July because their larvae eat the seed pods of evening primrose. There are no seed pods before that. So they're not out in March. There are native bees that come out, and they're here from March all the way through November. So if you take the area where they're spending the winter and mulch it or chop it down and throw it away, you've thrown away all those guys. So the real solution is to landscape in a way that the places these insects need can persist all season long. My son bought a house a couple of years ago, and the first fall he called me up and said, Dad, I've got too many leaves. What should I do with my leaves? I said, put them in your flower beds. And he said, I don't have enough flower beds. I said, exactly. That's how you shrink your lawn. Add flower beds. You can create a flower bed overnight by putting your leaves there in the fall. That'll kill the grass. Then you plant right through that. And people say, well, my plants won't come up through the leaves. Yes, they will. I don't mean 5 feet of leaves there, just a normal layer. Even delicate phlox come up. I've got pictures documenting that. Or, hide them in the backyard. But we're thinking of leaves now in the same way that watershed managers think of water. All the rain that falls on your property should stay on your property, and it will infiltrate. All the leaves that fall on your property should stay on your property. And the nutrients that are in those leaves will return to the soil so that you have an endless cycle of very healthy trees and the leaves that support them. Ideally, the leaves that fall from a particular tree will stay under that tree. Now, we are going to have lawn, but we're going to have less of it. So you don't want the leaves on the area of lawn you're going to keep, but there's plenty of other places we can put the leaves. And this is why we recommend for meadows or if you have plantings of black-eyed Susan, Rebeckias, and all those things, you don't chop them down in the fall because there's a lot of things living in those stems, including the bees that are overwintering, and they have their seed heads and the sparrows. There are a number of birds that don't go to bird feeders that eat those seeds all winter long. If you throw all that stuff out in the fall, you're throwing away a resource that our wildlife needs. So if you have a little meadow, you treat by either mowing or burning, and in the east it's most usually mowing, 1/3 of it each year, which means 2/3 are untreated. Because the third you treat, there's no time you can do it where you're not killing a lot of things. There's no safe period. But the 2/3 you don't treat will recolonize that fresh area that grows up. And then each year, any one part of your meadow is only treated once every 3 years. That's the recommendation these days. So, maybe the front yard is not the best place for your meadow, because that means 2/3 of it are going to stand there in the winter time. Although, there are a lot of native grasses that turn a beautiful brown, and I've seen really artistic displays of meadows with the clever use of native grasses in the front yard. So it's possible, but these are challenges. You're right.
Well, Doug, you have given us an extraordinary amount of information, and as a new homeowner who has very little interest in maintaining a pristine green lawn, you're giving me the go-ahead to really reduce the amount of work that I have to do in any season out there.
Can I comment on that for just 1 second?
Sure.
Because you are a typical homeowner. Most people do not garden at all. They hire somebody. They hire a lawn care service or a tree service because they don't have the time or the interest to deal with it. What about all those people? This is not just for gardeners. I want to create what I call, it's an empty niche right now, ecological landscapers. You can hire this person or this crew who will do all the things I just talked about. You don't have to know a thing about it. You just have to know who the people who know about it are and hire them instead of your lawn crew. And hopefully maybe it'll even be cheaper than the lawn crew, because once it's established, and they'll know how to plant, they'll know how to maintain it, but there is a lot less maintenance once you've got all these plants in place. So that you don't have to worry about this. That's our ultimate goal. And that's any students listening, that is a new career that is wide open. Every place I used to go before the virus, people would say, who can I hire? And I'd say, I don't know who you can hire, but soon they'll be out there.
Well, thank you so much, Doug. I want to let anyone who fell into our error in our listing of the time for this lecture, it's going to be posted on the Quick Center Live archive within 1 hour. So you will have time to go back, watch all of Doug's presentation right up until his PowerPoint shut down. So we know that today is just the day of technological infamy.
I was close to the end, so.
You were so close, and you summed it up beautifully for us in your 4 rules. So we just wanted to thank you so much for coming, Todd, for jumping on there at the end with your perspective. And we hope to see you all again at another quick live event that is correctly advertised for the right time. In the meantime, everyone can go out and start looking for those non-native plants to rip out.
Very good. All right.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Take care.